you're not afraid to play new music and you play a lot of vocals. He would always say, yo, you're a Jersey DJ, even though I'm from New York. And the reason why he would say that was because I would play a lot of the vocals. And Camacho loved the vocals because in Jersey, that's all you hear. It's all vocals. So like, you know, he was one that always tell me, don't ever stop, keep going. And, you know, just play what you like. Play for the people, but also give them a little bit of what you like. And that's how you break your records.
Let's do it. Today is June 21, 2021. Who will be speaking with?
Wil Milton of Bliss NYC, Path Life Music, Something Music, Publishing, all that good stuff.
How long have you been in the game?
Well, as far as business-wise, I would say it's been 28 years starting this year. But as far as music and just playing, man, almost all my entire life, you know, it started when I was 6 years old. That's when education really happened for me. Yeah.
What does music mean to you?
Oh man, music means it's like my savior. It saved my life. It helped me overcome a lot of obstacles. And music allows me to express myself, whether I'm DJing or writing music, writing lyrics. Music is just, it's like a vehicle. It's a blessing. You know, it doesn't start with me. It starts from the higher power, and I just get my messages from way, it's bigger than me.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Describe house music in one word.
Deep. You gotta have deep lyrics. I mean, because house music in the beginning really didn't have lyrics, you know. It was just like that deep bass, deep drums, you know. So to me, everything has to be very deep, you know. House music has changed along the way. I remember like when I first heard house music, very organic. It was just house music. Now you have all these different styles of house music, you know. But for me, it all started with, you know, it's deep roots, you know.
I love that.
Mhm.
How do you feel about the term soulful house music, and what does that term mean to you?
Well, for me, you know, when I think of soulful house music, I think of music that comes from the soul. It's like it's got to come from an internal source. And I feel like true soulful house music is what you put into it. It's your ingredient. It's not based on the trend because it comes from the soul. It's just like soul food. When you make soul food, it comes from the heart. It comes from your craft. So when I think of soulful music, I just think of that, the authentic person who's making music that comes from the heart.
So talk to us about your childhood. What kind of music did you hear around the house when you were growing up?
Oh man. So like I was saying, like at the age of 6, um, a whole lot of music. And to this day, I could remember, excuse me, we had the Mahogany soundtrack, which was the motion picture soundtrack for Diana Ross. And she had on that skirt. And then remembering just listening to that album because, you know, my parents took me to see the movie. And I remember listening to it, and I would play that song over and over. We had this big it was like a furniture type of record player where you had the seat, you had the turntable, and you had the fork, and you can play several records at one time. And we used to call him the bouncer because when it would fall, it would literally bounce. And then we had the 8-track on one side, and then we had a reel to reel. So it was like this one big block. It was like a big wooden console. And I remember constantly playing those records. My dad, God rest his soul, um, he was a serious record collector. So a lot of his music I inherited. And it had a lot of soulful stuff in there, like Barry White, James Brown, everything. Um, so I'm originally from Queens, Hollis, Queens, and I lived on 203rd Street. And around the corner, you had the Simmons brothers, Russell Simmons, and that whole crew out in Jamaica, you know, had their sound system. So at the age of 6, just going to those block parties, and that was education for me because I would hear like all these breaks. And, you know, if you know Queens, Queens is known for a monstrous sound system. And you would hear the music from blocks, you know, way ahead. And Hollis, Queens was definitely where I, you know, got the opportunity to learn more about the block party culture, like seeing like a power cord or extension run through somebody's house or run through the light pole. For me, that was part of that block party culture, you know, the schoolyards, all that, and closing off the streets. That was education for me. Um, Unfortunately, but fortunately, I had to move from 203rd Street in Hollis. I'm gonna say I must have been like 8 or 9 years old, still in Queens, but now I migrate to Long Island City, Queensbridge Houses. Queensbridge Houses is the mecca for music in general. Um, for us, you know, it was the ghetto, but it was ghetto school. And that was breaking point for me, familiar with the block parties, but this time um, I'm getting the exposure in the community centers because we had the Jacob Reese Community Center right on 41st Avenue. And inside the center, we had DJs like the Disco Twins because they lived in Astoria houses, but they would come to Queensbridge to, you know, do their sets. My boy Paul Brown, who had a Richard Long sound system, along with the Disco Twins, they had a Richard Long sound system, and this is why I say Queens is known for their sound because of Richard Long. Um, then we had River Park, which is now called Queensbridge Park, but that's where we got a lot of you know, education. So now at the age of 7 or 8, I get my hands on these compilation, and it's very rare. It's called Breakbeats, and it's a compilation. And I believe cats from the South Bronx did a compilation based on Africa Bambaata's breakbeat playlist. So all the breaks that Bambaataa was playing was on this breakbeat, and we're talking before ultimate breakbeats. This is breakbeats with the octopus on it, and it had different volumes. It had like Sing Sing by Gaz. It had Get Up and Dance by Freedom, Catch a Groove by Juicy. So all these breakbeats I have. No one in Queensbridge had them. I had them. So as a young kid, I'm out there in the parks and I'm just jamming, until, you know, I was old enough to travel. At least I thought I was old enough. My dad would give me money to go to the movies, but instead I would lie and tell him that I was going to the movies, but I was buying records. So we had Music Factory on Broadway in Manhattan. There was this other record shop I would go in the Bronx, and I'm like 9, 10 years old. I'm on the train just buying records. We had Uptown, we had Paul Winley record shop. I was in there just buying. When I tell you, just buying whatever I can get my hands on. Because for me, you know, growing up in a household where didn't have a big family, so I think that was my replacement. And outside of my home, outside it was a lot of crimes, a lot of things that were happening, and that was my way of just distracting like what was going on. So that's why I say music is my savior, because if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't be here right now, you know. But just collecting all that music, I'm surrounded by all this music. I'm surrounded by the culture. In Queensbridge houses, you had I mentioned my boy Paul Brown, you had Marley Marl, you had Dr. Bob Lee, who lived across the street, Bernard Fowler, who was one of the New York City Peach Boys, lived across the street, MC Shan, Tragedy. We had a brother named Hade, Nasir, known as Nasty Nas. This is much later, but just growing up in that environment, and we had Andre Booth, who was a keyboard player for a lot of the R&B 80s groups and singers. So in Long Island City, we had this famous recording studio called Power Play. Patrick Adams was there. A lot of big artists was there. So we would see a lot of the R&B post disco producers come in and out because you had to go through Queensbridge to get to Power Play Studios. So that's the merger, like, of the hip hop and, you know, just with the R&B disco, just that connection. So yeah, I mean, that's where, you know, it all started, you know, just with the disco, the break beats, hip hop, you know. And then I think it was Planet Rock that really set the tone for me, you know, as far as like electronic music, you know, because the music became a lot faster. You know, it went from like 100 beats per minute to now like 120 beats per minute. Now, you know, stuff is a lot more danceable. We used to have this independent station late at night, Africa Islam. To me, I think he was the first mix show DJ, who was the son of Bambaataa. Would hear him play a lot of the you know, the underground hip hop and commercial hip hop. And then I learned more about mix shows, radios. Then you had Chuck Chill Out, Red Alert. And then, you know, by accident, if you stood on, you would hear the music format change. And that's where Tony Regisford and Tony Humphries came on. That's really where the house music kind of like, you know, crosses path was, you know, what I was exposed to at a young age.
Wow. That's a lot of history. I love that.
There's more, man. There's a whole lot. Trust me, there's a lot, you know.
Do you remember the first party you went to?
Well, I mean, I remember as a young child, the house parties. Those I remembered. I remember a lot of the music, like the Curtis Blow, the Break, Spoonie G. Those parties I remember as my first party. But as far as like a club, I gotta say the first time I went to a club was Roseland. Roseland was the first that I went to, and then we had a club in Queens called Phase 2, which was on Queens Boulevard in Elmhurst. That was like our paradise garage. I wasn't really into freestyle music, but I was into the dance music, and that's where a lot of the freestyle was being played. You heard some of the like the disco stuff, like Lime and stuff like that. Actually, that was the first club that I ever DJ'd in. I got the chance to play one record, and I remember the house DJ got into an argument. He left the DJ booth. So they were like, you know, my friends like, yo, Will, go up there. So I remember playing a record. I think it was Information Society, Running. I just threw that on and the crowd went wild. That was the only record I got to play because he came back. But Pallets was the first spot that I really got to play. Now, back in Queensbridge, because like I mentioned, you had Bernard Fowler there, you had Dr. Bob Lee, who is part of, you know, the WBLS camp, being that Bernard Fowler was part of the Paradise Garage family because of his connection with the music that he was putting out. At that time in 87, 86, 87, I was going to a lot of hip hop events in the city, like Latin Quarters, the Underground. I was going to those spots. We had this neighborhood barber. His name was Bogey. He's called Leroy, and his barber. Just imagine a commercial barbershop in a store, but he had this in his house, and everybody, and I'm talking about from like Ronald Tess when he was young, because Ronald Tess lived in Queensbridge, also known as World Peace. His family lived in my building. You would see so many people in there. Sometimes you would see, Bernard Fowler. So one day, Bogey's daughter, Erica Bogan, shows me this flyer, and it's the Paradise Garage. And she's like, look, they're closing. And they're all getting ready to go because, Bernard Fowler is going. So I'm like, no, I'm going to, Latin Quarters because that's my spot. They're like, no, you got to go. So being that, I was underage, but because I was surrounded by all that history and people, I was able to go that last night of the garage. And, I can safely say that I was able to experience that, not knowing like what was happening, but being that I was able to get in because of my community. And then from there, I'm like, I need more of this. And then I started, going to more clubs like the Fun House, which was kind of like, wasn't the garage, but it was like afterwards, because that was kind of like what was left. Yeah.
Describe the experience of going to the Paradise Garage for the first time. What did it feel like? What did it smell like? What did it look like? Were you scared? Were you nervous? Tell us about it.
So big and scary. I mean, because the crew that I was with knew that I knew nothing about that, scene, so I was pretty protected and guarded, like I said, I was too young to really know that type of culture. You know what I'm saying? I come from a culture of hip hop where the crowd is totally different, so from watching, hearing and seeing all that, definitely was a different experience for me. Scary experience as well, because like I said, it's a whole different culture until afterwards. And then I got to embrace the culture more. That's where going to like I said, the Fun House, and eventually the Choice, the Tunnel, Red Parrot, Wild Pitch, which had the same kind of concept, but not, of course, the Paradise Garage, but that culture of, dancing in unity, dancing together, because in hip hop clubs, we didn't dance together. We were always either competing, so learning more about that. Yeah.
There was a time that hip hop and house were one, and then they separated. What happened?
So this is just my opinion. I feel like once the media took hold of it, I think it was no longer sacred, because I can say that my generation of coming into like the house scene was that onset. Like myself, Brian Green, you had Stretch, who eventually went on to acting. He started doing this thing. You had Khalif, Sellers, Voodoo Ray, Garris, Soe Ejo, I meant to say Cool, Chris Sawyer, Marjorie, God rest her soul. So that whole crew, Mob Top, IOU dances, at one point we all came together. And I just think that, the music, the video started to take some of that culture, and it was no longer, I guess sacred, Yeah.
I understand what you mean. Tell us about, actually, question. Do you consider yourself a DJ first or a producer first?
DJ. Most definitely DJing. However, DJing, because for me, like always try to find a way to incorporate the two together. Because whether I'm playing on turntables, 1200s, or if I'm playing on a CDJ, I treat it like as an instrument, because that source or that medium has to be able to translate what I'm feeling or what I'm saying. Just like a keyboard, I'll hit a D flat major, or I'm hitting a C chord, or I'm trying to find the right melody in a chord, that keyboard has to be able to translate what I'm saying. So somehow, some way, I'm able to create a feeling. Now, when I'm DJing, that's exactly what I'm doing. Just like writing a song, the song don't start off just like that. It's got to set the mood, and that's just me. When I'm DJing, I'm creating that climax. It's not always up here. I feel like when you write a song, it's got to have that feeling. It's got to have movement. I tend to play a lot of vocals, so when I think of what I'm playing, I'm thinking at least 4 or 5 songs ahead. So it's like when I write a verse, if I'm talking about love in the first verse, I'm not talking about in the chorus, making it big in the music business. It's got to start with the one concept for that song. If I'm writing an album, then I can change it up. And that's kind of like a set, that album, how I write. So when I'm DJing, I'm creating sets. I'm giving you sets of this. Sometimes I'll pull a classic out. I'll give you a little bit of this. I'll mix it in. So that's me finding ways to create dynamics. The way that I write music, by dynamics. If I want the song to sound stronger, I'll put an acoustic piano or some strings, and I'll crescendo it. And that's the same thing, excuse me, with my DJ gigs. You'll get a peak, and it just rises and brings you right back down.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about circles on the dance floor?
Well, being that I come from that culture, I feel like it serves its purpose for its time, and also depending on the environment. If the venue allows that, then it's all good. I come from a time where we had elders, we had people who would tell us, listen, bring that over there, or you know what, not right now is not the time. You hear the DJ's peaking right now, so the room has to be, we have to all be in sync. So the elders taught me like dance etiquette, and I took that with me. Now as a DJ looking onto a crowd, I feel like if it applies, and if it's appropriate to do that, then let it be. But if the venue doesn't hold it, then I just think that it interferes with everyone's experience. Because you have a dancer, because I'm a dancer myself, who now is frustrated because of the circle. The circles that you see today is not the same circle you saw back in the 80s. Totally different, because you had the elders like, yo, cut it out, enough. But you don't have a lot of elders today that will say, family, break it.
DJing, what is your intention when you DJ?
To make people feel good, to really let them know that they're not alone. And that's the beauty of playing vocals, is that with vocals, even with a track you can, but with vocals you can really connect with people, just based on what the story is saying. I tend to create a storyline with my music. A lot of New York City DJs have done that, where they'll use the vocals and they'll create a story. So what I do is I want you to know how I feel through the music.
Do you have a safety record where you're like, this crowd is dead, but I'm gonna put this on. They're gonna turn up. What's that record for you?
For me, like the savior song will be like a Mono track my new track, like Crazy Black, like his remix of Crazy Black Coffee, because it has those elements, it has those drums that will bring, you know, the crowd back to life. So like for me, that would, you know, because it has that rhythmic flow, that bass line. It's a universal bass line, and if you know the song, you know it has like a real bouncing bass line, and anything by Manu will definitely, you know, save my set if it's sinking. Um, you know, also depending on the crowd, a lot of times a classic will bring it back to life. You know what I'm saying? Um, Nowadays, a lot of the Afro. So if I feel like the vocals ain't really hitting it, I'll turn to Afro, because I know that it takes the guesswork out of the way. The drums, and especially in New York, you know, they love the drums and the tribalness. So yeah.
Now, uh, looking at DJs, uh, what does it mean to make it, and who do you feel has made it in this DJ space?
Well, I think it depends. Like, what do you mean? Like this in this time, or like?
Just in general, I mean, because I feel like the DJ world has changed so much, right? Like back in the day, like it may be a big deal to get a visa residency, but now that doesn't really matter, right? Or back in the day, it may be a big deal to get a residency at, you know, vinyl or whatever, right? But then vinyl's closed and it's never going to be open, it's never coming back. So
Yeah.
I guess in this day and age, what does it mean to make it, you know, as a DJ?
For me, I believe that knowing your audience, developing an audience base, and, you know, finding a way to and this is why I was saying, like, when it comes from like soulful house music, you got to stick true to yourself, because an audience they know when you are true to yourself, as opposed to sounding like somebody else, or you're trying to fit in to a certain, I guess, core group of DJs. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like having that connection with your audience, whether it's you know, before we weren't going out, everything was, you know, pretty much on lockdown. So like using social media um to really engage your audience, to me, is important. And even before, so you know, the pandemic, before that, you had to do utilize social media as the footwork to engage your audience, let them know, you know, what's happening. Back then, I mean, even still now, you had to make records in order to get those overseas gigs, but some DJs kind of like were able to get it, you know, based on their talent, not so much of how many records they put out. Um, so I mean, there's quite a few DJs who've done that. But nowadays, you know, everyone pretty much is on the same level. The bedroom DJs, I don't think that it maybe it might come back, but everybody was on the same platform, on the same level. Nobody was traveling, so a lot of the traveling DJs were doing Twitch, along with, you know, rising stars. Unsung DJs we were all in the same box. I just feel like this pandemic has put a reset button on it. So now we can set up new criteria for levels of DJing. So that's why I asked, depends where we're at, you know. So
You talked about DJing overseas. Tell us about your DJing overseas.
sure. So my first overseas gig was in Japan, and I want to thank Danny Krivet and Andre Collins for sponsoring and co-signing me to actually to go overseas. And you know, it just so happens that Rio Watanabe was the event coordinator and promoter for these events. And being that I did have some records out, it did help. You know, with that Japan tour, I was able to play at some really, really good clubs during that time. And also having a residency, because at that time I was doing two residencies. I was doing Together in Spirit, which was Conrad Neblet's event. It was a Sunday tea party, in Manhattan on 28th Street. And that was from like, I think it was like 6 to 12. And then I had my Touch Tuesday event that I was doing at Sapphire Lounge. And that was with myself and the late Hector House Nation Cruz alongside the Candy Store, which was a mixed show on 89.1 WNYU. So, you know, those two things were kind of like running at the same time. And a lot of the Japanese were actually coming into New York, you know, because of the other events that was happening. So that also helped, being that I had, you know, some residency in New York at that time, along with the co-signing. So that to me was big because I got a chance to see how people really react to music. Here it is, people in Japan, and I gotta say, and I'm half Japanese as well. The appreciation that the Japanese culture has for music is incredible. It's like they may not know English, but they know the music and they can feel it. And this is why it goes 360 full circle, because that soul comes from the heart. And I believe it's the melody, it's the emotions of that music that they're getting. They don't understand the lyrics, but there's something with that emotion that they're connecting with. And even as DJs, and that's that emotion connection. So it's all full circle. Playing overseas definitely helps to shape one way of playing DJing, you know.
I didn't realize you were half Japanese.
Yeah, I'm half Japanese and half African American. My dad, God rest his soul, he's African American. My mom, Japanese, God rest her soul. When my father was stationed in Japan, when he was in the military, that's how they met. And he brought my mom back and they had me. But yeah, I'm half Japanese.
Oh, wow. Fun fact, you know, I don't think people knew that, you know.
Nah, you know, it's like I guess people guess because my last name is Milton.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? They're like, he looks Spanish, but he's not like Gonzalez or Rivera, or, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I think people kind of like guess that if that's my real name, but yeah, it's because, you know, my background.
You talked about your DJ residencies. How important is it today to have a DJ residency, like for the new cats and establishing their career?
So, you know, I believe the residencies are important because, I mean, especially the way that the culture is when it comes to booking, you have like a lot of either festivals or you have events where there's more than one person on the bill. And it's hard sometimes for each DJ to really get it off and expose, you know, their full craft. Having a residency, you can experiment more. You have more playing time. And it's about, as a DJ, to me, it's about a brand. You have a brand, and because it's a do-it-yourself industry, you have to be able to set a brand where not only do you stick by the name, but your sound has to be part of that brand. You know what I'm saying? So having a residency helps, you know, with solidifying your brand. Like with my event that I do now with some, you know, key individuals, Bliss NYC, that's the brand. Like we were able to keep the brand Bliss NYC going, you know, as far as like people talking about it, even with the pandemic, because people understand that music, that sound, which is, oh, that's Bliss NYC. It's what's made of all the ingredients, which is, you know, it's dedicated to the dancers because the event is made by dancers. So we understand, you know, what a true dance experience is, you know, what it all means. And it's sexy. Like that's just Bliss NYC. Putting those two elements together, now you're able to create a brand and make it work for itself. It's hard to do that if you don't have a residency because you're going to this venue, you're going to that venue, you're being booked by this promoter, so you might have to play a little differently because of the DJ that was before you or after you, and it sometimes it changes the way that you would naturally play.
Talk to us about mentoring. How important is it to, I guess, two parts. Did you have a mentor in your DJ career? And or how important is it for the next generation of DJs to have a mentor to help shape and guide them in this space?
Yeah. So my mentors, I gotta say, is my childhood friend, who I call him my brother, Vaughn Merritt. Um, he's one of those that will not tell you what you want to hear, but will tell you what you need to hear. Because you have some friends like, oh, yo, you was dope, you were hot. When in reality, they don't want to hurt your feelings. So I know that I can count on him to really give me real feedback. So he's the one that helped me as far as like, because at one point, and this goes back to, in the beginning, I wasn't mixing, I was scratching. And he was like, why don't you try to mix this in? And he didn't know how to do it, but he kind of like had the concept. So he's the one that influenced me how to mix. So anytime, I have a mix that's not right, he'll let me know. Later on in my career, I gotta say the late DJ Camacho is really the one who helped me, because he was the one that would always tell me, yo, Will, what I love about you is that you're not afraid to play new music and you play a lot of vocals. He would always say, yo, you're a Jersey DJ, even though I'm from New York. And the reason why he would say that was because I would play a lot of the vocals. And Camacho loved the vocals, because in Jersey, that's all you hear. It's all vocals. So like, he was one that would always tell me, don't ever stop, keep going. And, just play what you like. Play for the people, but also give them a little bit of what you like. And that's how you break your records.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Thank you.
Is there any money in house music?
There can be. There can be money. Now, if you're looking for, the millions of dollars, you want to buy your home, you know what I'm saying? It can happen. It takes a lot of work. I'm not saying it can't, but for the majority, a lot of us are starving, especially with the pandemic. And my heart goes out to a lot of my peers in the music industry who solely relied on their income with traveling, because it was tough. No gigs. I was blessed because I have a day job. I'm a licensed addiction counselor, so that helped me. As far as like, making sure that I had income coming in. But for the cats who are able to do it, much blessings to them. But I feel like if you want to make music, if you want to make money with music, you got to be able to go outside the box. It can't just be house music. I think a great example was CNC Music Factory, how they were able to create something in the middle, right? They gave you the popish stuff, but somehow, some way, they'll create a different mix just for our dance floor. So you just got to get crafty at it. Like me, when I write music, I don't just write for the clubs. I don't write for the heads. I write movie scores and music. So those are other ways of actually making money. It doesn't always have to be track source. Music is meant to, music will never die. People will always need music. You look at Netflix, they're generating their own Hollywood. They need music. So you got to be able to, create uncomfortably at times, and you got to be open to different options. To me, I think that's how you make your money. You can make a living off it. So
I'm going to bring up a topic or a name, and I want you to tell me either a story or the history of it. So you mentioned Richard Long. For those that don't know, who is Richard Long and why is he important to our scene?
So Richard Long was a very intelligent sound engineer, if that's what you want to call him. To me, he is a sound engineer because as an engineer, you have to have the most extensive knowledge and respect for sound. You got to know how sound travels, what a room does to sound, and how a room could actually affect sound. So, I mean, being that he created a lot of amazing sound systems for some great clubs like the Paradise Garage, Studio 54, and other clubs, even Zanzibar and Jersey, Ministry of Sound in London. He was able to create that brand, because you wouldn't know a Richard Long crossover because it was stamped, and he had certain sound design speakers that would let you know that that's his brand, the birthers and all those different horns, very creative. So to me, I think music would be different if he did not exist. Clubs would have had a different experience had he not existed. And he understood the needs of a DJ. Excuse me, whether it was a club or a mobile jock, because like I said, the Disco Twins and Paul Brown used a mobile system version of the Paradise Garage, which is a movable system, and seeing how it translated in the outdoors, because outdoors is totally different when you have walls in a club, and for that system to really deliver in a free space like that, it's incredible. So he understood the needs of a DJ. I think we need more sound engineers. I mean, I think Vinny, I think he's cool. I think he's out in Jersey, but Richard Long, definitely, I think he set the pathway for all these other sound engineers that came after him.
Tell us about Iguanas.
Oh wow, Iguanas. I got to give credit to Kat Ayala and Lou Corbia, because I believe they did their event there first, and then I went there one day and I'm like, this is really cool. And we were looking for another spot. We were doing Gravity NYC, and that was actually the first place that we actually did Gravity NYC. Myself, Rodney Carter, Rico Scott, Cindy Harden. I'm thinking of Vaughn Merritt, my brother Vaughn Merritt. And myself, those were the key players of Gravity NYC. We did 2 events there on a Sunday. It was cool. I think it being now it's different, but back in the 90s, anywhere beyond 34th Street was considered uptown, and I don't think a lot of the heads were really comfortable with going that far up, because that was like, whoa, that's way too far. But times are different, so we decided to move the event downtown, and I had a good connection with a bar lounge owner. His name was Jahan, who owned Sapphire, and we spoke with him about moving the event there. So that's where we did Gravity NYC for a few years, and then from Iguanas it went to Sapphire. Somehow, somewhere, we always created different type of branding, but the same key players, because we had Touch Tuesday, which originally was myself and Hector Cruz, but with Gravity NYC became the birth of Powerline. Powerline was an event that we did at the Coffee Cave in New Jersey. The same people in the background, the same, people you would see at Gravity, you would see at Powerline. And then when we completed Powerline, that's when Bliss NYC, came about. Same people in the background, but we learned that it's hard to market if you're constantly changing the name. It's like Coca-Cola one day, but Cola Coke the next day, same people, but it's hard for people to really absorb and digest it. And also trusting that you're going to be around, So we learned we need to stop changing these names up and just stay consistent with one name, which is Bliss NYC.
Speaking of parties, how important is it to be seen at other people's parties? Or is that not important at all?
Yeah, it's important. And that's one area like I always try my best to be to improve, in like supporting a lot more, because I know like you know, when I'm DJing or if I have an event, I want to see my peers there. One of the greatest things you could ever have is not only having your audience, your dancers happy, but also making your peers happy in the music business, meaning like your peers acknowledging your work, because that's what we do. We want to share the music not only for the consumer, but for our peers. We want to motivate it and also inspire. So on the flip, I know that if it feels good for me to see somebody in the building, it's important that I do the same. And somebody must feel the same way that I feel had I shown up at the event. Like, I went to an event this past Saturday, and, it was really my first time being out there, and it was, since the pandemic. So it was an adjustment for me. But I understand that right now, because we're rebuilding, being in those clubs and supporting your peers is really important right now, because it's like you're going into these events not knowing. You're going with it. Trial and error. You're going with the flow. You're seeing what works, what doesn't work. So you need that support.
What effect did COVID have on our scene?
A lot. I mean, people. Some artists went homeless. Some artists lost money. Some artists had to, you know, change their residency, have to leave certain countries, um, have to rely on family members or even that peer, that musical peer that or that person that was in the music industry, asking them for support. You know, sometimes getting government assistance, whether it's a certain grant money, just to have food on a plate. That's different for someone who has it all. Um, and the funny thing is, like, New York City, the club heads, I love New York City, um, and we love our scene to be a certain way, but I feel like the pandemic, um, for me, it teaches us that we almost lost it all. We didn't have any clubs. We didn't have anything. The only thing we had to rely on was social media, and everything was virtual. So we know what it feels like to lose a scene because it was nothing. And I feel like, not that we should settle for less, but I think we should appreciate what's there now, because at one point we didn't have it. Sometimes people, you know, say, I don't like to go to this venue because they don't have wooden floors, or I don't like this place because it doesn't match my dancing needs. But we had nothing. Now we have something.
Mm, that's facts. Let's talk about production. If money is no object, talk to us about your dream collaboration. Who would you like to have in the studio with you?
Yeah. Wow. Um, I would have to say Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. I would love to have them in the studio. Basically because um, those two guys, and that production team, they're like my heroes. Not they are my heroes. Like, they're like my go-to when I think of like writing music. Um, I would love to have them in the studio with me so they can see how much respect and appreciation I have for their work. Um, as far as like an artist to enter the studio, man, I would love for Alicia Keys to be in the studio, just working side by side with me to create, something magical. Um, see, you know, if you listen to like a lot of the house music, it tends to be a lot darker. It's very dark, very minor. So when I write my music, a lot of my music is in major keys. It's very bright because I feel like when you think of dance music, when you're in a club, you want to feel happy. You want those happy emotions. And I always, imagine Alicia's songs. They're so they always feel good. They're moving, emotional, and I'm just like, that would be a perfect ingredient for my music. You know, her emotion with my emotion, you got great chemistry. So those are the two individuals I would love to work with in the studio.
Let's talk about advice. Well, actually, two-part question. First part is, what advice would you give to the next generation coming after you? Second part is, knowing what you know now about the scene, about the industry, about house music, what would you do differently?
So my advice is study the craft, study, you know, where this came from. I see a lot of young jocks out there, and you know, this scene didn't just start with, you know, track source, didn't start with you know, CDJs, started way before that. And I feel like you gotta go back to the beginning. You gotta go back to even hip hop. Kool Herc, to me, you know, was, you know, a true pioneer with DJing. And then from that, you know, came Nicky Siano, and you had David Mancuso, Larry Levan, you know, studying that, and then bring your way back up to present. Because without studying the culture, you're only getting one part of this, which is the present, the contemporary side of our culture. But there's more to this, because that young jock may have to play for a veteran or someone who's been in the scene way before, and you need to understand how they understand music. You got to understand what makes them rock. I remember a time where a lot of the heads didn't want to hear new music in New York City. They were kind of like attached to the classics, and until they had to become more open minded about just the new music. Now veterans, they embrace this new music, but I felt like you have to be able to understand that that crowd. You have to understand how they were taught, whether it was from Larry Levan or David Mancuso. If you're playing for them, you have to know them. You have to know just like the older jocks like myself have to understand the newer generation. You got to understand how they do things, like the young producers that's out now. You know, I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, it's nothing to it, but you know, it's something. So even for us who's been there before, you gotta be able to understand what they're doing in order to make it. Like I say, like for us, I guess veteran jocks had to even change our way of playing, because we had a certain formula for those garage heads, for the loft heads, for the shelter heads. We had to play a certain way, but now we have to change that up. We got to play for the younger audience. And that's the only way it's going to survive, because if we want the younger audience, you got to cater to them too. You can't get stuck in how you used to play back in the 90s. You got to move right along with it. So,
Absolutely. When you were coming up, which DJs did you look up to?
yeah. So, there's a few, but I got to say the template for me is Tony Humphreys, but Timmy Regisford first. Um, Timmy Regisford for the um, the mixing, because you know, back in the day when I was playing hip hop, what we would used to do, and I noticed that Timmy would do that, and I still do it today. We used to take an instrumental of a hip hop song, like say Boogie Down Production, South Bronx, and we would take, and that no vocals, we would play the instrumental, and then we would take um a R&B joint like Freddie Jackson, Tasty Love, and we would blend that together. Not a mesh, we would blend it together, and we would make mixtapes from that. And we would just let it ride. So me, being that I'm a mixer, I'm also a programmer. And I always felt like what Timmy Regisford and Tony Humphreys have in common is also the mixing, but also the programming. being able to program a set that not only rocks but makes sense. You know what I'm saying? It's like the that whole night, whether you heard Tony or Timmy, it's a chapter of a book, and there's no chapters missing, and everything falls in the right place. So those two were like my foundation. As far as like just advancing, I gotta say DJ Disciple, um, God Bless the Dead, DJ Dave Camacho, DJ Basil. Those were like my icon. As far as like, just really learning how they connected with the audience, because I watched how they connected. They really knew how to engage an audience.
And then speaking of DJing, how and when did you know that you made it as a DJ?
I haven't made it yet. I haven't.
Really?
Nah, I'm still looking for that. I feel like
you played around the world. You had residencies. Like the dancers love you. Like, you've got productions.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for all that. Because a lot of those things that I've, been blessed with, a lot of people haven't received those blessings as of yet. But for me, I feel like I've made it when the whole world knows about Bliss NYC and that sound. I feel like they only get half the message, but they didn't get that aha moment. Okay, this is what Wil is talking about. See, because and this is not coming from an ego perspective or like a boasting, but the sound that I deliver, it's kind of like an acquired thing. Some people would say, he plays too loungy, or he's too fluttery. Like, he's not like a peak house DJ, which I am. It's just that they don't get the whole picture. They only get that set, and they don't see like what's coming behind that. You know what I'm saying? It's like you come into a movie and you watch the middle and you think you got the whole picture, but you haven't, because you didn't get the beginning. You only got the middle. And in the beginning is a part that's really missing, that's telling you what's happening in the middle. And I just think because of learning from the DJs I mentioned, like taking all that, pulling all that together and creating my own vehicle, you know what I'm saying? It's hard for some, because sometimes people are accustomed to the banging all night. Like, it's just like this, you know what I'm saying, all night. And for me, I'm not that type of DJ. I gotta create peaks and valleys. I gotta bring you down. Like, to me, it's to the point where like some dances I intentionally frustrate. Like, I'll bring the vibe down. I'll bring you down, and like to the point where you're pissed and you're probably cursing me out, but out of nowhere, boom, it just it rises up. And I don't mean, to be disrespectful, but it's like sex. It has a climax. And again, you don't get a lot of that. People just jamming just all the way through. So I think certain promoters will only take that chance with that type of style of playing. Because you got to remember, I come from the parks, and that's how we played. We played just like that. We played everything. We didn't just peak it up all night, So.
One thing we didn't talk about, what is the Loft?
Oh, wow. So the Loft to me is it's like home. I was able to go to 3rd Street. Wasn't part of the Prince Street and all that, because I was way too young. But for me, the Loft was everything. It's like, I call like a dances congregation, because you had nothing but dancers in there. Everybody was, almost the majority of people that was in there were dancers. So that was a great moment for me. Also, at the time, you had the choice. I was going to the choice, and you had some of that leakage of the Loft heads, and going into the choice. So was a groundbreaking time for me also, as far as like dance etiquette and learning, you know, just more about dancing, you know, because you know, I'm a b-boy too, and we were all about battles, and I had to unlearn to learn. So everything I learned about dance culture, I had to get a fresher course, and that was by watching the elders do their thing, and the Loft had it. So I can only imagine Prince Street, because Third Street had some of that mentoring still, you know. But yeah, Loft was the joint.
Let's talk about your legacy. What do you want the Wil Milton legacy to be?
What I want the legacy to be?
Yeah.
Peace, man. We need peace. You know, because of so much confusion in the world, just imagine how much better the music would sound if we were listening to the music at a peaceful state. You know, worrying about, you know, how we're gonna eat, worrying about, you know, what's next. Because I understand the way that we're living with the unknown, a lot of confusion. You know, do I get this? Do I take this medicine? If I take this medicine, will it harm me? What's gonna happen with my kids? You know, what does my job look like? Am I secure? You know, and you know, with so many things, like, you know, you have a lot of theorists talking about a lot of stuff, and it only creates fear. And when we're fear, we're not at peace, and that's what we need, just more peace. And I'm hoping that I'm able to, you know, continue to do that with, you know, with my music and create that peace. You know, sharing is like, I remember like before the pandemic, because I also play on cyber jams, and I used to, and this is way before you know, we went shutdown. I was doing live video streaming, and for me, I always felt like, you know, sharing my music, what's the sense of having all this music knowledge if you don't share it? And you know, I was doing all that even with the residencies in New York City, still sharing, you know. And I feel like that's another part of a legacy is sharing more, you know. Can you imagine, like, if all of us in this music, whether you want to call it house music or dance music, if we all came together, just like in the hip hop culture, they stick together and they make it happen. So can you imagine if we all came together and, you know, just, you know, made it happen and really collated this culture? It'd be something amazing. Like, you know, I always say, like, the cats in Chicago, like the chosen few, they tight. They tight. They make it happen. And they all do their own thing, but they come together collectively. So I imagine if New York did that, some of, you know, the people who do have the power, you know, the political power to make that happen, I just feel like, and it goes back to peace. Gotta be willing to do something. Gotta give up something in order to gain something.
Last question. What's next for Wil Milton?
So that's an event that you see the flyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an event that Becky Nunez and Sin Rose, they're doing July 3rd. And that's at the Now and Then. That's in Brooklyn. So I'll be rocking myself with Curve and Mark, and a host of others. So that's Saturday, July 3rd, and that's something that's up next. And just looking to really, we're not really rushing as far as, like, you know, getting the out, you know, Bliss NYC back, you know, as far as coordinating the event, we're just waiting to see what our options are, you know. But when we do come back, you know, Hedge would know. But you know what feels good, Muima, is the fact that people want it, because whether I'm out there or some of my peers who work with Bliss NYC, they're out there in the community. People tell them, look, we waiting for Bliss NYC to come back. So it feels good to know that people want it. And it goes back to DJs having that connection with the audience, having that engagement, because, you know, and it's just a natural thing in music. Sometimes where people are forgotten due to absence, and you know, being that we haven't been out there for almost 2 years, and the fact that people still talk about us and they really miss what we do, shows that we were able to create something special in their lives where they don't forget because it's imprinted in their hearts. So that's what I mean about having, you know, strong ties with your audience. So that's what we're trying to do. Again, we don't want to rush it because, you know, when you rush things, you know, things can happen. Things could, you know, may not get the outcome that you're looking for. So we're just taking our time with that. And just music, you know, I'm working on 3 albums right now. I have a my own independent album that I'm working on. I have an album with Carolyn Victorian. She's out in Baltimore. I call her New York because she's, you know, she's with our family. She comes out. Also, I have a Wil Milton and Rodney Carter album. So what we did is I went through the vault, all the stuff that we worked on that never came out. We're putting that out. And just doing a lot of writing. Just I've been writing a lot of songs lately, a lot of lyrics. You know, I got a lot to say, so I just been just writing, you know, and hopefully get the events going sometime in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. It's good to see the evolution of your career, and you're still in the game, you're still relevant, you're still part of the conversation, and you can still turn out the dance floor.
Thank you. Muima, you know, we go back like just like that. I remember like going back from like Deep House page and what was that, Underground something, and
Underground
you
NYC
know,
Candy Store
yeah,
Tuesdays. I remember Hector was out front doing the door, and I'd be what's up, and I'd chit chat with him back in the day. You
yeah,
know, and I'd
man.
go to Idlewild, you know, and go see E-Man
Wow.
and Lola next
You
door.
remember that? Like
Yeah,
on Tuesdays, they would go back and forth.
the people go back and forth. Yeah, I
And you
remember
know
that.
what? It wasn't a competitive thing. It
Mhm.
was like, all right, we're gonna both eat off each other, and
Yeah,
we were able to make it happen. And you know, that's just how it was. And that's what I was saying, like with that peace, when you're at peace, you don't have to worry about competition because you know what you bring to the table and you're willing to break bread with others. And it goes to, like I was saying, if we all collated, just on me and E-Man alone, Tuesday nights in the Lower East Side was banging. No other area during that time was banging other than E-Man event and our Touch Tuesday, and they both were like, it wasn't even a competition. It complemented that area of Lower East Side. It gave people something special, and they were able to go back and forth. And you brought up, you know, thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, yeah, way back. Yeah, awesome. You have
Yeah,
a
yeah.
good night, and I'll keep you posted.
Thank you. Thank
All
you. All
right.
right, take care. Bye bye.